All right, welcome to the DAWk Show, a podcast where we deep dive on music, the writing process, and digital audio workstations, aka DAWs. And we do this in a way that is hopefully educational and not too jargony or gatekeepy, because music technology should be accessible to everybody, and we're not going to be weird tech bros about it. We're gonna be cool tech bros about it. Anyway, my guest today is comedy songwriter and producer and generally awesome human, Jake Dewar. Hey, Jake.
Hi, thank you for that intro.
Yeah, awesome. Well, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I was up early mixing a song for a client, and I am very tired, but happy to be here.
So I guess just to start off, can you give the audience just a little bit of a highlight reel of your journey as a producer thus far?
Sure. Well, it started out. I came from a acting background, theater first of all, and sketch comedy. Then got into singer-songwriter world, and then started producing my own music, going to a recording studio. And then a series of years went by where I wasn't recording anything and got tired of paying money for recording sessions. So I learned how to do it myself in late 2016. And I've been now doing it for myself and other folks who want to hire me. It's been kind of in the comedy songwriter clique, but it's important to have somebody who understands that aspect of it as well. But I've also working with other artists. A friend of mine from high school has a funk band, and their mixing engineer bailed on them, and so I am now working on mixing their album. So
nice.
You know,
cool.
little things come in here or there, but that's sort of how I got into it, more for myself, and now I do it for other people as well.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm curious if coming into production as an actor, do you think that like how do you think that drives who you are as a producer? Because I know my acting stuff like drives a lot of what I do.
That's an interesting question. I feel like satirical songwriters has a weird vibe, and it doesn't always fit in general. I mean, there are a few folks out there who do it and are well known. We've got Weird Al's, and we've got, Bo Burnham's and other, Garfunkel and Oates and all these other folks, Rachel Bloom, kind of blending it with musical theater, Flight of the Conchords, and so on. It's generally not a very lucrative art form. But I think, I've always considered myself an actor who plays guitar and or happens to produce music, but I'm still learning. It's a weird blend of skills because writing songs in itself is, a craft, as well as being good at your instrument, whether that's instrumental or vocal or both, or multiple instruments. And then being able to produce and arrange is a skill. And I kind of learned it from another musician I worked with, Doug Scharf, jazz player who's worked with my dad, who's also a now retired jazz musician. And I kind of learned really just from working with him, and he would give me suggestions of just like, oh, here's how we can make this a little tighter and less clunky, because I'm often figuring out stuff on the fly. So I've kind of learned from trial by fire, working with that engineer based on kind of what I had in my head, and now I'm able to execute it and do it kind of on my own timetable.
Yeah. It's interesting how these skills all blend together. Like I definitely resonate with that as someone who also is a performer and is now producing because it's cheaper to just figure it out myself, Yeah, it's so interesting how, I feel like once you get one creative skill down, it's just like, okay, cool, let's just figure out another one. And it's just like this endless rabbit hole.
It really is. And I try not to rest on my laurels too much. I think there's always new ways to explore um, approaching a mix. Like when I started, I actually wasn't using a proper DAW. I was using video editing software. I was
Oh
using
wow.
Sony Vegas or whatever software I had at the time. I think now it's just Vegas. But like they had EQ and compression in there, and I'm like, well, I'll use it this way and make it work. And there's been little adjustments along the way. Now I know when I first started mixing, I didn't know how to do compression at all. And there's a couple early albums of mine that I mixed that like you go back to listen to, I'm like, oh, this doesn't sound quite as good as it should. And then I figured it out pretty quickly after that. What all the different dials and terms meant. But honestly, most of what I've learned from YouTube tutorials.
Yeah. Yeah, I do YouTube tutorials. I've done a couple like online courses that were they were just videos I paid for. So and things like that. But yeah, it's I feel like ear training is it's like I'd imagine it's similar to like what sommeliers go through, where it's just like you're training your ears to a particular palate and like, and
Mhm.
it's just like figuring out all of these like fine details and notes of things.
Yeah. It's not to say that like knowing frequency range numbers is important. I think it helps you later, but
Mhm.
honestly, I think you should always use your ears first when it
Yeah.
comes to anything related to music,
Yeah.
mixing or tracking or whatever it is, adjusting the tone knobs on your bass guitar, whatever it may be. Um, I personally think that it is possible to do it yourself. You also just need to be kind to yourself, as with any
Mhm.
craft. It's just like it does take time to get to the level you want to get to. Sometimes, right now, I'm working on kind of like a parody of a pop record, and so
Mm.
I'm taking a whole bunch of different styles. I have like an Adele type track. I have a Mumford and Sons type track. I have a Eurobeat track, which we'll get into here in a little
Yes.
bit. Um, and I want to mix it like a pop record. And then so I've actually been taking extra time. Sometimes I'm usually pretty fast, especially if I'm working with a client to get a track done for them. I've had folks who are like, I want a parody of this song. Can you recreate this backing track? And that's actually fun to sort of recreate an arrangement that already exists and sort of just try to listen and figure out what does this need and how can I approximate that as best I
Mhm.
can with my skill set. Um, I lost my train of thought, but anyway, it's it's a journey for sure.
When you say mix it like a pop record,
Mhm.
what is going to be different from how you mix a comedy song record?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, this is technically still a comedy song record, but I'm trying to approach it from the pop producer's perspective. So quite often I'm usually efficient enough that I can get a song tracked in a day or two.
Mhm.
Um, but this one I've actually been doing it in multiple sessions and taking my time and figuring out, okay, what is the proper arrangement? How can I approximate a good string arrangement here? Um, do these layers complement each other? Is this really just the same as this? And should I change the voicings? Um, so arrangement wise, that's what I'm thinking. But in terms of mixing, a lot more compression.
Mhm.
I think modern pop records really squash the hell out of vocals. And vocals are always the hardest thing to mix because they're the most got the most dynamic range
Mhm.
in their raw state, and that's a whole thing too. Like you can, even after you do
Mhm.
you know work of compressing a track to try to even out the levels, you still have to do what they call automate, which
Yeah.
is bring specific syllables up or down. Because sometimes there's just like one end of a word that you can't hear and you got to boost that. And so there's several ways to do that as well.
I want to break down like compression in a way that like in case audience members who are still figuring it out, how they understand it, but also I feel like I need to share with you how I started to figure out how to hear compression, and it is
Hmm.
this. If you're listening to a drum track and you pretend that a small child is playing that drum track and you are hungover, which track annoys you less?
That's a very good analogy.
The small children I work with are all very well and good. This came out of my head when I was working on Saturdays and had made some poor choices the night before working on a Saturday.
It happens.
But yeah, so compression is when the sound is like the overall volume level is at this like even level, and you're not hearing like the loud sounds are not punching you in the face as much.
Yeah, you're squeezing the
Mhm.
louder parts down, so it's a little more even with the quiet parts. But it doesn't make it entirely even either. And so that's why people do what they call automation, which is just finding specific moments in a track where it's too quiet or too loud, and they'll bring it up or down. It's very meticulous work, and that's why I charge by the hour.
Yeehaw. Oh man. Well,
It's fun. It just takes time, but the reward is worth it once you get there, and that's always the fun part.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we look at this track you wanted to share today?
Sure. Let me share my video and audio. Okay. So, this is a Eurobeat track. If you're not familiar with Eurobeat, I'm sure you've heard it in a lot of memes and didn't realize it. But this is a song called Minimal Risk, and it's very dense. A lot going on here. I use Reaper, which I know Mike used in previous episode. I like it because, like he probably mentioned, you can download it for free. And then it just, after 60 days, sort of guilts you into buying a license, which I was happy to do because it gives you the whole program. And once you know what you're doing, it's very customizable and fun to use. And I create templates, and you can hopefully see here I've got markers for different sections of the song just to make my life easier. But it's a very dense mix. About 33 tracks here. Some of these are what I call folder tracks, which basically means I have a track that sort of acts as a master fader for a group of tracks, like guitars and then synths and backup vocals and things like that.
So
and what that allows me to do is maybe mix certain aspects of a whole group of tracks, like a bunch of whistling vocals, for instance, in unison. I can just EQ them as a group and then compress them individually, and it saves me time later. But it's also just a way to keep me organized.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me just let me play some of this because you have not heard this before.
I've not heard this.
And then we'll get into it a little bit.
Sounds good.
Going 5 miles over the speed limit. Won't read disclaimers, gonna skim it. Riding a bike with no lights while it's dark out. Stealing a bag during self-service checkout. I always try to hedge my bets, not break the rules, but once in a while I forget. I'm not the type who will leap off a ledge, but I am right on the edge of living life on the edge. Minimal risk, minimal risk. I didn't pick a fighter's poop, but now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk, minimal risk. I am a proof of petty crimes with more misses than hits. Go!
And so forth and so on.
Yes. Heck yeah. That's I think I may have heard clips of it on socials, but it's good to I'm all about this.
Yeah, this is it's very raw state. I have not mixed anything. All I've done is just sort of set levels to where it's like, okay, I can use it as a reference of how I want it to sound. That's always the first thing I do is I just get my level set for individual tracks. So how do we want to get into this? There's a lot of ways we could go about it.
Oh my gosh, there's so many ways. Let's break down what all we have here and just sort of talk about your color coding a little bit.
So we've got a bunch of drums here, and let me just isolate some of these so we can hear what's going on. So we got percussive kick,
Nice.
snare, which by itself doesn't sound super cool. In the context of the mix, it does work. Real 90s hi-hat. And then got a tom fill here. Here it is.
Yeah.
And a crash. And then let's see, once I get into the pre-chorus, I add a tambourine just to heighten it even more. Going with the hi-hat.
Oh yeah, there it goes.
So yeah, and then we got, let me mute some of the vocals so we can get into the instrumentals a bit. Bass track, and that's just a keyboard synth bass.
Okay.
I do play electric bass, but this felt like I needed a more electric kind of sound.
For sure.
And then I have a whole what I call rhythm synths, some softer sounds. So like a choir.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a choir mixed with a synth. Let's see. Got a chorus here. And then strings. Pad synth here. So the three of those together really kind of fill out, the sound.
gorgeous.
And it's stuff that's in the background that you don't even realize is there. And that's what's always cool to me about these kind of arrangements is like there's texture behind it that you don't even know it's there until you take it away. And so that's a cool example of that. And then I have what they call an orchestral hit, which I'm just going to find. There it is. Got to have one of those in there. And then here what we got to the real Eurobeat sound, which is they call a sort of synthy sound. Some they make it sound more like a fake brass ensemble. This is probably more of like a rave synth sound, but it still fits the vibe. Let's see. And then I got a harmony track to go with that. And those are MIDI tracks.
Yeah.
Which maybe we should explain what that is.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain MIDI tracks because like they were so used to them.
Well, here's what I've got to kind of show it. It's a grid, and each grid is set to a pitch. Now in this case, this is the drum sample, right? So I actually have a template in Reaper. This is what I like about it as well, is there's like a sampler program that you can use, like a plugin, and you can set it up to like if you have your own samples, and that's what I did. This took me like 4 days to do.
Oh gosh.
During the pandemic. But yeah, what it does is there's a grid, and it's basically if you have samples of your own or that you've queued up. I actually have one here for the synth that's a free version of what they call Complete Start Native Instruments plugin. And this is like a free version of it that I haven't even made full use of, but it has all these cool sounds on it. And this one fit the vibe. Basically, you can either play it by hand or draw it in, which I did here. And you can either have it real lined up on the grid precisely for this kind of electronic style, what we call a quantized beat, which is just right on the grid, exactly, quarter note, eighth note, where it needs to be. Or you can do what they call humanizing it if you don't have an actual, which I do for drums that are not in this style if I'm trying to make it sound like an actual drum kit, because I unfortunately can't play drums. But what I usually do is, because of the limited amount of USB inputs I have, I draw it in and then we'll humanize it later to give it some dynamics and make it sound like more like a human was playing it. But for an electronic song like this, that's not quite so important. You can have it be real even and precise. So, but there's also a lot of tracks on here you can see are not these little lines. So those are played by hand. So it's a mixture of human and electronic elements. Like I have what they call stabs, sort of a rhythmic thing going on with the same kind of synth sound. And what I'm doing is I actually have this filter, EQ filter on my keyboard that I'm got tuned down. It cuts the high end, and then I slowly boost it up as I'm playing live. And you can hear it slowly building, and you don't even realize but that's what a lot of electronic music will do, is like they'll slowly build it up. And a lot of that is just like sweeping across the EQ spectrum until it actually doesn't sound muffled. It sounds full and clear and bright. And then you get to the chorus and we go crazy. I did a similar thing with this kind of drone track. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah. I enjoy that orange is just like the stabby synths. Like like you have synths and then you have aggressive synths.
Yeah, for sure. This is just like, I had so many tracks. I'm like, this is just how I've decided I'm going to do it today.
Yeah.
But I generally speaking, I have these kind of color coding, like, okay, blue is guitar, red and yellow will be vocals. Sometimes I have more tracks than I thought I was going to, and I run out of colors, but that's a me problem.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, let's see. And this is just playing at one random point in the song. And I'm just like, adjusting the fader up and down. And then again, talking about textures, I had this, where is it? See, I have too many tracks. This is also why I like to color code.
Yeah.
Where's it's over here. The wrong color. Let's see. So I have this little arpeggiator thing going on, this pulse.
Yeah.
And what you might notice it's doing is I have this little ping pong pen plugin so that it'll go left and right rhythmically. And that creates this sort of just slightly psychedelic effect.
Yeah.
But it kind of drives the beats more. But it's there in the background. You don't even realize it's there.
It's not carrying over in the Zoom audio, but I hope that it carries over in some aspect, because that's very exciting. But yeah, but I can hear what it's doing. Those are so much fun.
Yeah, no, it's really fun ways to layer these tracks. And then over here we also got guitars. So let's just get into that by themselves here. So what we got here is 2 rhythm guitars, which are panned hard left and right. That's a pretty standard thing to do in a rock mix. So we got that one on the left. And they've got slightly different sounds, so it sounds like 2 guitar players. That's a pretty normal thing to do. And then can show you the sort of the plugins, what's going on there. I have these free guitar emulator plugins that I'm using. This is called Ignite Amps, which is kind of for that distortion tone. And then I also have an amp modeler. So it's just sort of simulating a clean amp. Because unfortunately, if you just have the distortion, it sounds completely different in a not fun way.
Yeah.
It's just like fuzz.
Oh yeah, that's not great.
Whereas but if I take away that distortion, it's just a clean guitar. So sometimes tracking with these things is weird. I also did for my lead guitar track, I actually was using a distortion pedal just to get a slightly different sound. And yeah, the plugin I used for the clean amp was this free version of Amplitude.
Mhm.
But if I turn that off, then the lead track is going to sound a little nasty. So this kind of warms that sound up.
Yeah.
Make it sound more 80s.
Yeah. So you have some things that, so it seems like a lot of them you're using plugins after you've recorded the sound into it, and then other ones you said you had a pedal on it as it was going in. So
Yeah. So it's been an interesting journey too, because I used to I'm recording this song at a higher sample rate than I'm used to, which just means how much data information of audio, how much extra detail of the audio you're getting. The standard way to record is in what they call 44.1 kilohertz, and this is in 48 kilohertz, which is a little higher. But let me grab my my interface here. This is my first and current interface, a Zoom R16 recorder. So I wasn't recording with a DAW like Reaper initially. I was just recording into this unit and then mixing it through a program like this later. Now I can do the recording process and mixing process through this program. But what I didn't even count on when I bought it is it had these built-in guitar effects. And so I would actually have these clean amps or distorted amps, and it would just be printed on there. So I had to actually commit to my sound. But when I started trying to record in 48 kilohertz, it wouldn't let me use these sounds. So I had to find another way to do it. And what I've learned is that sometimes tracking with the effect on can sound a little weird, but once you play it back, it sounds fine. And you can also, because it's on a plugin, you can adjust it or fine-tune the sound if you need to. So it is nice to be able to sort of change your distortion sound if you come back to a session later and you're like, oh, I don't like this. Let me try this sound. And then you can try a different amp, which I couldn't have done before with kind of my old way. There's advantages and disadvantages to doing it one way or the other. But sometimes it's nice to have the option to change your amp sound later if you want to.
Yeah. That way, like, I mean, I imagine too, like, creatively that's useful too. If you haven't made like a clear choice on the sound yet, you can track it and then add the extra levels versus having to commit to stuff outside the box.
For sure. I mean, sometimes simplicity does help just speed up productivity, because I've considered at some point upgrading to a program called Guitar Rig. Or Amplitude, like what you saw, which is, allows you to pick a whole bunch of different amp sounds from different eras. And the thing about this program like Guitar Rig is there's like 300 presets or something. And it's like, sometimes depending on how you record, you're going to lose the idea just by spending an hour or so trying to go through all the different sounds. So, and some programs like to drain a lot of CPU. So there's a lot of ways you could go about something like this. I would say to anyone maybe who's listening, who's trying to like get into it, there are plenty of ways to do it for free and get the job done, if long as you know how to use the program or the plugin you're trying to use. If you want to get fancier, there are certain elements of convenience to doing, tracking in a certain way like this. If you just have clean guitars, and you're trying to just like, you don't have an amplifier. But I don't know. It's a whole rabbit hole, like you said.
Oh, yeah. It's a whole rabbit hole. So I guess as far as things to talk about in this session, so you said that this is unmixed. Can you sort of walk through a little bit of where you go next with this?
Yeah, for sure. The first thing I would do if I was to start mixing this right now is I would just play through it, make sure I like the average overall mix. And I try to watch the master fader. I have it averaging at about minus 6 dB, which I've been told is a good space to kind of have it to begin with. Because you can always make it louder later. That's the last step in the whole mastering process of this, which essentially is just making sure the whole mix sounds fuller and then eventually louder at a commercially loud volume. I start with the most, once I have my level set and I'm happy with that, I go with the first tracks that I think are the most important to sit well and then build the other tracks around that. Most of the time, I start with drums. In the case of something like this, I would start with the kick and the snare and then the lead vocal and make sure that those sit well against each other. My ears are probably not optimally set for this because I don't usually mix with my headphones anymore. I use I have iLoud micro monitors, these sort of handheld size speakers that are what they have called flat frequency response, which means they're not biased. They're not like, they don't have a heavy amount of bass like some speakers do. So it allows me to just sort of hear the mix as it really is. But they're also small enough that it feels more like a real world reference. And usually if I need to adjust it, starting from there is a good source. That said, I do have ears and we're here doing this. So let's get into it. So let's see, because that's a bass drum, I'm going to not cut any low end out of it, or not much. So I'm going to just start with that kick. And usually I find the most dense part of the mix and just loop it. Because if I can get the mix to sound clear there, it's going to sound okay everywhere else, versus if I mix just a quiet section of the song, it might not work in the louder section. So I'm going to just loop this section here. Let's just hear where we're at for context. Yeah, so that's the chorus. So that's pretty good place to start. And let me actually zoom ahead here. I have some notes that I gave to myself of just the different frequency ranges that you want to mix. I use 6 bands of EQ.
Okay.
So I've got 3 low end, couple mids and some highs, and then because it's kick drum, I don't usually worry about the highs. You want to really focus on just getting that sound. So I might try boosting her this first and see what that does.
And just for audience context, those are frequencies and sounds that are like so low, like you almost feel them, which is great for this kind of track.
Yeah, it's a percussive pulse, and that's what you want for sure. But I'm going to go through some of the lower end frequencies and make sure it has enough presence but isn't too muddy. That's kind of the nature of mixing with lower mid frequencies, is you don't want to get rid of them all, because sometimes that can make the mix sound kind of thin and underwhelming, but you want to have enough to where it sounds full but not muddy. So that's what I'm going to try to mess with here. And what I usually do is I do what's probably too much just to hear it extreme contrast, and then I back it off slowly. So then I try it off. That's what we had before. And that's after. Now it is getting a little louder, so I'm going to adjust this gain knob here, because sometimes our ears trick us into thinking it's better, but usually it's just louder. And so I want to make sure that that's actually true. Oh, maybe not that one so much. Yeah. Let's try it. Let's go with that for now.
Okay.
And then, again, I'm going through this real quickly, but just so that there's some semblance of a change. Before, after. So it's a little thicker sounding, a little more percussive. And again, I might tweak that later, but it's just sort of the kind of thing where you just want to go kind of think from a standpoint of what does the track need based on how it sounds now. And if it doesn't sound full enough, then it's like, okay, let's mess with the low end a little bit. That's one way to go about it. The other way I go about it is I do what they call top-down mixing, which is I actually go through the whole mix.
Okay.
From the master fader. That's kind of what I've been doing lately. And I kind of go through the whole thing just to give it a little extra punch, a little extra clarity.
Minimal risk.
So I would go through that and just like EQ the entire mix, really tiny moves, just to sort of get it a little bigger sounding.
Okay, so it's,
again, I go through that. I'll do a tiny bit of compression, just sort of catch sort of the high end, just to not a super high amount like I would on individual tracks.
So I'm just trying to clarify. So you're starting with the master and doing just something with you're compressing and EQing like the whole sound to start, and then going through with the individual sounds.
Yes, that's right.
Cool.
So I would loop, let's say, the first chorus or the last chorus, which would probably be the most dense part of it, because if I can get it to sound clear, it'll sound fine everywhere else. So I'll real quickly just do like a demo EQ of like, here's how I might go about this. I'll try to do like the quick version of this process if that works for you.
For sure.
Okay.
Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's group and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk. I am a proof of petty crimes with more misses than hits. Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's group and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk. I am a proof of petty crimes with more misses than hits. Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's group and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk. I am a proof of petty crimes with more misses than hits. Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's group and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk.
And by the way, if you're getting tired of hearing this on loop, welcome to my life. Here we go.
Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's group and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk. I am a proof of petty crimes with more misses than hits. Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's group and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk.
Okay, so that's what I had before. Again, this is kind of subtle, so hopefully if there's a noticeable difference, but...
Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's group and now my neighbors are pissed.
So I went through 6 different frequencies. Let's see what I did. I boosted the real low end a very tiny amount, like literally 0.1 of gain. Lower mid, I brought down -2. Another lower mid, down -9. I generally try to cut frequencies before I boost frequencies, because I try to figure out, okay, what does the track not need, and get there to that, and then I boost stuff. And you can see I did more boosts in the higher range. Let's see, that's around 1K. We're talking kilohertz frequencies. Close to a dB, 1 decibel of at 5K. And that's a frequency that can get kind of nasty, but also
that's the
adds
no
clarity.
Frequency. That's like the really like like it's
it depends. Sometimes it's and then the other kind of tricky, what they call the air frequency, is 10K and up. And so sometimes a little bit of that is good on certain tracks, and then there's other tracks where you definitely don't want it. But that's just an example of what I could do on this, which I did here really quickly. And then let's see, I'm gonna do some compression, which is I'm just going to catch the tops, just the loudest stuff. And what I usually do with compression is I bring the threshold way down to where it's squeezing it down a lot, and then I back it off. So that's what I'm going to do here.
Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's poop and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk. I am a proof of petty crimes with more misses than hits. Yeah. Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's poop and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal.
And it just adds a little extra, like, I don't know, presence or a little extra consistency to the sound that wasn't there before. It's real subtle. I then do something called multi-band compression, which is like a blend of equalization and compression, where you're taking the whole mix and you're compressing specific frequencies. In my case here, I've got low end, mid, and high end. And that's a way to sort of tighten up the sound as well. So there's other ways to do it. I have a little bit of stereo widening just to bring it out even more. Again, I use that real subtly. And then at the very end, after I've mixed everything, I use the limiter here.
Which is just making sure that you're catching any of those extra highs and not breaking people's stereos.
Yeah. Well, let's just skip to that process now, just so people can hear kind of what that does. So let's see. Oh, I created a mock instrumental track for myself for live shows, because that's normally what I do is after I've mixed the song, I'll mute the vocal tracks, export a new instrumental file so I can sing live with a backing track. What I'm going to do is I'm going to link the threshold and the fader together so we can actually hear what it's doing and not hear it get louder. And then I'll bring it down real extreme and then back it off.
Minimal risk.
So that's way too much.
Minimal risk. I am a proof of petty crimes with more misses than hits. Yeah. Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's poop and now my neighbors are pissed.
Okay, so because these individual tracks are not processed in any way, this is not the best example of how to do this, but there's a meter here going up and down. That's showing how much it's basically squeezing it as high as it can go without, so it's not distorting it, but it will have to compress the whole mix a little bit to do that. And so I try to make sure on average, it's not compressing it any more than 3 dB, which you can see on this meter here on the right. So I'm going to now unlink it and actually make it louder, and hopefully that won't hurt people's ears. Here we go.
Minimal risk. I pick a fighter's poop and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk. I am a proof of petty crimes with more misses than hits. Yeah. Minimal risk.
So that's, again, I don't do that until the very end of the process normally, after I've gone through the master fader, done EQ compression, whatever other plugins I use on individual tracks, like saturation, which is its own thing of just trying to create the illusion of warmth that you get from like a tape machine. If you use something like that too much, it actually sounds like it's distorted. Let me get into that. This is a very unorganized way for me to explore this, but
we're going on a journey. Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, snare, maybe we'll have it. Yeah. So let's see if I take the snare. This is the saturation meter way up. So that's a lot.
Now it's all soft.
Yeah. It's too much softness. I can't handle it. So you can use that a little bit, and what it does is it sort of creates the illusion of it getting louder.
Okay.
It's hard to explain. If it's used tastefully, it adds this extra like sort of warmth to it, but it also can kind of sort of boost the volume of it a little bit if you need it to. It's just a way to add this extra kind of texture to the sound.
Yeah. It's hard to describe exactly, but like, yeah, you hear the texture, because it definitely just went from like snare to like Like the other end of the spectrum is just like flicking a wet towel at people.
Yeah, which for some songs you might want, but
Maybe
probably
not here.
not to that extent. Yeah, not so much here. I mean, there's other tricks that you can use as well. Like I usually do a thing if I have a dense mix like this, and let's say all the instrumental tracks sound great, but the drums, after mixing everything in, they don't sound quite as percussive as they did initially. I can do what they call parallel compression, which is I create either a duplicate track or a bus track, which is basically routing all the drum tracks into one other track that you can mix separately. And what I do is I will crush it really extremely with compression. So it's just like really biting and hard and compressed, and then blend a very tiny soft amount of that in with the natural drums sound I already have. And it gives it a little extra presence and fullness back in, so it'll cut through the rest of the mix, but not interfere with anything else going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because that is a whole other rabbit hole, and I'm gonna pause from completely going down the parallel compression rabbit hole, but basically, I mean, I'm still like figuring out the words for it. So it's a mix of compressing it like super hard and then letting in the more clean sounds, so it has that, so it's a blend of those.
Yeah, so that's the distinction there is you want to have them as separate tracks. You want to have the natural sounding track you already had. And you can do this on other tracks too. Some people do this with vocals with like a really distorted vocal sound and then the natural clean one. I tried a trick recently where I made another vocal track. Let me just kind of do that as an example.
For sure.
Let's just to keep it simple, I'm gonna just make them duplicate tracks. But you can also do a thing where you route one track into the a blank track and do it that way. What they call a bus track. But I'm going to do a really extreme compression. I'm going to make it 10 to 1, and then go way down.
Minimal risk. Minimal risk. I didn't pick up Fido's poop.
Right? So you can do something like that where it's super compressed and blend them together. So let me just do that.
Minimal risk. Minimal risk. I didn't pick up Fido's poop, and now my neighbors are pissed.
Right. So that's probably harder to hear. Let me actually do something which I did with EQ, which is I'm going to do just the high frequencies of this duplicate track and just really like, for like, let's say it's not quite, I don't have enough diction going on. I want to get some extra air and high elements.
Minimal risk. Minimal risk. I didn't pick up Fido's poop, and now my neighbors are pissed.
So that's the duplicate track. And then if I blend this back in.
Minimal risk. Minimal risk. I didn't pick up Fido's poop, and now my neighbors are pissed. Minimal risk.
By itself.
Minimal risk. I am a perp of petty crimes with.
And again, it's kind of hard to describe sometimes, but like it's just sort of things that you don't have to do, but it's if the track is missing a certain something, these are cool like advanced tricks that you can do.
Yeah. What you just did there too helped think that's a very important mixing technique with these wordy comedy songs, because I only just now figured out that it was picked up Fido's poop. I was like,
there
I got
you go,
poop.
right?
And then I was like, what? But yeah.
Okay, well, I'm glad you said that, because yeah, it does show, like, sometimes because I listen to this music more than anyone else does, it's hard for me to be objective. So but that is a point. You do have to kind of sometimes take breaks and give your ears a rest, which is why I don't normally mix with headphones anymore, because my ear fatigue is a lot faster. That said, I live in an apartment, so I can only play it at a certain volume at certain hours of the day. What else? Oh, another cool trick that I like to use, especially in terms of getting the vocals to be clear in a comedy song like this, is what they call side chain compression. And that's essentially where I will, let's say the snare drum is cutting off some of the clarity of the lead vocal track. And so I'm going to click this route button and route my lead vocal into my snare drum track. And what I'm going to do is there's these two little things, audio 1, 2, 1, 2. That's the same input. If I play it now, it's just going to sound twice as loud.
Ringing the doorbell.
So we don't want that. We want to create an auxiliary input. I'm going to create new channels. So it's not going in, it's not basically right before it was, the lead vocal was playing on that track as well as the snare drum track. So it was twice as loud.
Okay.
So now I've created a separate input to go into the snare itself. So let's say I have a compression track already on the snare. I'm going to create a new compression plugin. And I'm going to click main inputs, go to auxiliary inputs. And as an example, I'll set my compression ratio here. And I'm going to bring it all the way down. And what you're going to see is it's going to make the snare track, as when the vocal signal comes in, the snare track is going to duck. This is called ducking or sidechain compression. And you'll hear this in a lot of commercials, like where a voiceover is playing over an instrumental track in basically any modern commercial.
Ringing the doorbell, then running away, yeah.
So that's all the way down. Now the snare is gone. So what I do is I watch the signal and I have the vocal just sort of come in subtly, and that way it's going over the snare, but not so much that the snare drops out completely.
Yeah.
Ringing the doorbell, then running away, yeah. Calling off work, I stayed up late on Sunday.
So without that in.
Stealing a tiny towel from the...
So it's just a way to get extra clarity to let the vocals come through, but not still have the instrumental feel full. And there's more extreme ways to do that, like just have like a full backing track of like whatever, pills the advertisement is talking about.
Or in podcast intros.
Or in podcast intros. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because that's I'll do that sometimes with the outro on the show. Although sometimes I just automate the volume down. but I'm starting to do more sidechain compression to to have that, and basically just automates the track going down underneath the speaker in the way
again,
it's smooth.
It's very technical and kind of tedious at times, but it really does help. And I do that usually on either a full drum track or snare. Sometimes if the guitars are a little loud, I'll have it just go over like the whole group of guitars just a tiny bit. It's always a tricky balance to like have the vocals come through clearly and then not be too loud that it's drowning out some of the instruments. So I know it's a constant struggle, but every song's different, and you got to do what's right for the song.
Yeah. At the end of the day, what matters is, does it sound good?
Right. And it doesn't matter what plugins you used or how you got there. No one's listening is going to care about that. There's many ways to get to that final step. Other thing I have here, I have a send track for reverb. And you can, sometimes I do this with delays, but this is something I have in every template, which is I have it muted right now. I don't deal with reverb until I've mixed all the instruments. And basically what I have here is a single track that has just the reverb effect, and I have certain individual tracks routed into it. And what that allows me to do is save CPU, but also have consistent reverb effect. That way I don't have to put it on individual tracks and set it every time. It's just there, and I can click the button to adjust how much of that reverb effect is on each track. So if I mute it right now, it's going to sound awful because there's way too much. Let's hear what that sounds like.
Ringing the doorbell.
So right now it sounds like we're in
Like a
a very
bathroom.
echoey,
Yeah.
echoey bathroom. Yeah. So I'm gonna isolate the vocal track and just bring that down to something tasteful.
Ringing the doorbell, then running away, yeah. Ringing the doorbell, then running away, yeah.
That's a little better.
Yeah, that's nice.
So, and again, I can adjust how echoey I want it to be if I want it to be real extreme.
Ringing the doorbell, then running away, yeah.
That's, wow.
Yeah.
See, even after I turned it off, it was sustaining.
That's how you know it's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's still going.
That is a depressing Lana Del Rey vibe right there, which I don't know if we want for this.
Ringing the doorbell, then
That's a little better. So you adjust it until it's something tasteful. I usually start with lead vocal and then a snare drum and just make sure it sounds good for that. That's a good place to start. Let's add some in. I'm going to route it in right now.
Ooh.
And as you can see, it actually brings out other frequencies
Yeah.
in the snare track that you're like, okay, we don't want that in there.
Yeah, it's very thuddy now.
And take it away. So again, it's a small amount, but like when you put it on a whole mix, even a tiny amount of reverb, like it gives it this extra sense of space and dimension. And I don't know, somehow makes it sound better because of that, when it's that versus completely dry. Although sometimes you want a dry snare sound on an electronic song. So again, lots of ways to play around with that. It's kind of just a matter of taste and context. But yeah, that's that in a nutshell. And then what I also do when I'm done is I'll because it's on its own separate track that's just the reverb effect, I can solo it. So because that's all the extreme reverb on the other tracks, I can soften it by doing a little high pass, low pass filter just to like round out the edges. So I'll go through it. So without that EQ adjustment, it's maybe a little too biting. So if I want to soften it, I can do that to just sort of make it a little less biting.
Yeah, that
on
that
the whole,
guitar,
just in case there's a little too much room sound. Yeah.
Yeah, that guitar reverb was like,
It's a lot. But I think it's better to show the extreme examples just to see, okay, now I can back it off and make it more subtle. So yeah, I'm gonna make sure to not save all the changes I made to this, but that's a very haphazard way of showing you what my process is.
Yeah, I mean that's what we do is just giving people a little bit of an idea of these things.
Well, I'm happy to show it off just because I feel like sometimes I spend many hours doing this on a thing that people will hear for like 2 or 3 minutes one time. And it's just, it just goes to show just how much work goes into even a dumb comedy song like this. Like I went all out on the production here, as you can see, because I think it's, I like to focus just as much on making it a good song and making it a well-produced song, as well as making it a funny song. Those are separate crafts and skill sets in themselves. But I think they're important. I think, and there's a lot of instances where you've got somebody who maybe has good lyrical content, but they're not that skilled musically, or their musical style they chose doesn't complement what they're trying to put across, lyrically, and that can be applicable to other genres and intents with music. But yeah, I think for me it's always important in terms of when I get the mix and the production behind this to have it enhance the comedy rather than distract you from it.
Yeah, it's a whole art of like, and also like paying homage to the genre and knowing enough about the genre to find comedy within that genre, for sure.
For sure. And just on that same note, the place I got the full context of this arrangement was from another YouTube tutorial. I'm just like, oh, what are all the boxes I need to tick to get this arrangement? And so I made sure I ticked that box. I cut you off. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I was just going to stop screen share if we are done with the demonstration.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's just do that so we can be in the big screen now. Awesome. Well, I am very excited about that song and the new album and all the things. I wanted to get into our rapid fire questions as we are starting to round things out.
Cool.
So, the first one. Explain your favorite plugin like you're a sugared up 8-year-old.
Okay. My favorite. Let's see. Okay. So this song is thin and boring. I want to make it sound big. This thing's called Ozone, and it makes the track wider and bigger. It expands the track, and you can hear it all around you. And it's real cool because if you don't want your track to sound thin, this will make it sound real huge and make it a big boy track.
Yes, this is what
I like to have big boy tracks. I want to be a big boy track. I want to be a big boy track.
Thank
Put that
you.
in your promo trailer.
Thank you. I want to be a big boy track. See, that's why I added the sugared up line, because I want that kind of delivery.
I had to really channel that. That's all the energy I have, Gail. I'm so tired.
It's okay. It's okay. Okay, so next question.
Yep.
What's one skill that took a while to figure out that you're really proud of within the music technology thing?
Sure. Honestly, it's still a learning curve, but EQ it's one of the most useful tools that you can have. It's probably the most important tool in mixing in general. And what I've learned is there are rules, but there are also, you can break those rules in certain instances if you need to. I used to do a lot of just like cutting low mids out, and then I realized, oh, my whole track sounds a little thinner than I would like. So there's so maybe on the bass guitar, the kick drum, I will keep those as is or boost them. Also, just getting certain tracks to sit well in the mix is usually not a volume thing; it's an EQ thing. And I felt very proud of myself this morning because I was able to finish a mix on a track for this funk tune for a client, like a 6-piece band.
Yeah.
And I got everything to sound clear and full and upfront, and nothing was really intruding on it itself. And it took a little extra time, but like when you get there at the end, it does feel cool. You're like, oh, I do know what I'm doing. But I'm also like, I still got a ways to go. So yeah, it's like I said, constant learning curve.
Absolutely. So counter to that, what is one topic that you were like just at the tip of the rabbit hole on as far as skill building?
Trying to think. There are certain styles of automating vocals, like getting vocal tracks to sound even without having to do it manually. I had one track on my last album. It was a parody of contemporary Christian music, the music, not the religion. And what I did on that, I did this sort of, I watched a tutorial and I set up this way I hit play and then the vocals will figure out the loudest parts of the track and the softest parts of the track, and you can manually adjust it, bring it together.
Oh, cool.
But you also still have to adjust it from there because a tiny breath sounds like unless you make corrections. So it's kind of crazy. I don't remember how to do that, and I'd have to watch the video again. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way I can set up a template to do that. There's other types of plugins that do the same job for like a compressor that'll like not just bring down the loud parts, but also will bring up the softer parts. And I'm just trying to find ways to, I don't know, find better shortcuts to make that happen more efficiently for myself and for others so that I can move on to something else and the client will be happy because they spend less money.
True.
What a concept.
What a concept. All good things. Okay.
Yeah.
Last rapid fire question. If you could create a plugin or piece of music tech, and science has left the room, it is all through magic, what would you make?
That's a great question because this is very much where science and art meet. And I am curious to know, I know there are mastering programs like Lander, sort of AI mastering services. I wonder if AI will get to the point where it'll do the job of a mixing engineer. I'm just saying like, okay, send me, okay, based on this arrangement, here's what you need. I'd love to see a program that would just say like, okay, here's a preset. I know there are other recording programs that have presets, but I don't know if they're all very useful in every context. And I would just love to have some kind of program that could say, okay, here's a preset. Maybe you can tweak it from here if you want to, but we'll do most of the work for you.
It sounds like Clippy, but like wow, it's a dated reference.
Yeah. I see you're trying to mix an EDM track. How can I help?
Yes.
Yeah.
Except in my head, it's like a little cartoon with like 100%. They have like a beard and like a nose ring, except they're also Clippy. I don't know.
I see you're trying to produce an Elliott Smith style song. First of all, wow. Secondly,
yes.
Here's what you need.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess I just sometimes I get tired and I just want to just have a button to say, can you give me this sound now, please? I don't want to work for it.
Yeah, just plug in all my calculations.
Yeah.
Awesome. So those are all of my questions.
Oh wow.
Anything else that you want to any I guess closing thoughts or anything?
To anyone who is either wants to work with a mixing engineer or is thinking about either becoming a producer or getting into mixing their own audio, you can do it. You can do it. You can learn how to do it for free. There are resources out there. If you want to get into Reaper specifically, the channel I watch is called Reaper Mania, and it's by this guy named Kenny Gioia. He talks with a slight New York accent, and it's actually, he creates some of the best tutorials I've ever seen in my life because they're at a pace that you can understand it without feeling like you're being talked down to. And it's not so fast that it goes over your head. But really, I would just say you can start simple. You can do a lot. You can get a lot for free or for cheap. Starting out with terms of like software, you really just need your ears and your confidence as a songwriter or as a producer. I would say, yeah, avoid the paid plugin rabbit hole that you can go down, at least initially. I didn't have pitch correction software for many years. I just sort of made it work and just picked the best takes that I had. And now I have this polyphonic version of Melodyne, so I can correct chords if I need to. And I did that because I paid for an upgrade accidentally first and didn't buy the program, so I ended up spending more money than I thought I was going to. So don't do that either. Read descriptions on Sweetwater and do your research before you make those kind of purchases. Yeah, stay in school.
And stay in school. Awesome.
Be a big boy mixer.
Be a big boy mixer.
Make big boy tracks.
Oh my gosh. I would just cut it there, but I do want you to tell people where they can find you and support you.
Yes, of course. You can find all my big boy music on JakeDewarComedy.com. You can follow me all social media at Jake Dewar Comedy. My YouTube channel is Jake Dewar Comedy TV because I had Jake Dewar Comedy and then deleted it and thought I could get it back. So it's Jake Dewar Comedy TV there. If you want to fund future projects for as little as $1 a month, I have a Patreon page, which is also Jake Dewar Comedy. You can hear tracks like the Eurobeat song. It's actually on my Patreon page now in its unmixed state. So you can hear the whole thing there if you want, and other tracks. And I am about to get into the casting phase of an original musical called Rich People in Space. So I'm going to be focusing on that very soon, and you can find details of the show on my website if you're in the Chicago area.
Yay!
Yay!
All right, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and hopefully this helps everybody be a big person mixer.
Big Boy Mix.
Big Boy Mix.
BigBoyMix.gov.
Thank you so much for listening to The DAWk Show. Make sure to take a look at our show notes to find out more about today's guest. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you are listening and send it to all your cool music nerd friends. Okay, see you next time.